The sun dipped low, painting the Roman sky in hues of blood, orange, and bruised purple. Aulus Metellus, senator of Rome, stood on the mosaic floor of his peristyle garden. He surveyed his domain. Fountains tinkled, cypress trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. The scent of jasmine filled the air. This was his haven, a world away from the noise and chaos of the forum. Aulus, a man hardened by years of political maneuvering, felt a familiar ache in his bones. The weight of Rome, it seemed, was a burden shared, even by its most privileged sons. His toga, crisp and white, felt heavier than usual, a symbol of an empire teetering on the precipice. He had served Rome faithfully for decades. He had fought in the legions, debated fiercely in the Senate, and dispensed justice with an even hand. Yet, a gnawing doubt lingered in his heart. Was Rome as invincible as it once seemed? The reports from the borders were troubling. The barbarians grew bolder, their raids more frequent, their hunger for Roman land and riches insatiable. A shiver ran down Aulus's spine, a coldness that had little to do with the approaching night. He pushed the troubling thoughts aside. He would not succumb to fear. Rome, he reassured himself, had weathered storms before. It would do so again, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been sown. The Forum, once the heart of a vibrant empire, now echoed with a different kind of noise. Gone were the days of thunderous pronouncements and passionate debates. In their place was a cacophony of anxieties, a chorus of discontent that even the grand marble statues and gilded monuments could not muffle. Aulus navigated the throng, his keen eyes missing nothing. Merchants hawked their wares with forced enthusiasm. Senators, their faces etched with worry, huddled in small groups, whispering about the latest news from the frontier. Beggars, their numbers swelling with each passing season, pleaded for alms. With increasing desperation, the empire was stretched thin, its coffers depleted by endless wars and lavish spending. The old values of discipline, sacrifice, and honor seemed to be fading, replaced by a thirst for luxury and a disdain for hard work. Aulus, a staunch traditionalist, felt a pang of sadness. Was this the Rome he had sworn to serve? He reached the Senate chamber, its bronze doors adorned with scenes of past glories. The irony wasn't lost on him. Could Rome, once the conqueror of nations, now conquer its own demons? He entered the chamber, the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions heavy on his shoulders. The Senate chamber was a grand spectacle of marble and gold. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the faces of the assembled senators. Yet, the atmosphere was far from bright. A pall of tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Aulus took his place among his peers, his presence commanding respect. The debate raged on, centered around the latest barbarian incursion. Some senators, their voices shrill with panic, called for immediate military action, demanding that the barbarians be taught a lesson they would never forget. Others, their faces edged with the weariness of experience, urged caution. Rome could ill afford another costly war. Aulus listened intently, his mind sharp as ever. He knew that the situation was dire. The barbarians were not mere raiders. They were organized, determined, and hungry for Roman land. This was not a threat that could be ignored or bought off with gold. It was an existential threat to Rome itself. He rose to speak, his voice carrying the weight of his years and experience. He urged his fellow senators to put aside their personal ambitions and petty squabbles. Rome needed unity, not division. Needed a plan, a strategy that would not only repel the barbarian threat but also address the deeper ills that plagued the empire. Back in the tranquil confines of his villa, Aulus found no solace. His family, once a source of comfort and pride, now reflected the anxieties that gnawed at the empire's core. His wife, Livia, once a pillar of strength, had become withdrawn, her eyes betraying a deep fears for the future. His son, Marcus, a young man on the cusp of manhood, seemed restless and impatient. He had no patience for his father's stories of past glories or his warnings about the dangers of complacency. He yearned for action, for a chance to prove himself on the battlefield, to reclaim Rome's lost honor. And then there was Aelia, his daughter. Once a bright and carefree spirit, she had become increasingly distant, her thoughts preoccupied by matters that Aulus couldn't quite grasp. She spent hours in prayer, her face illuminated by a strange inner light. She spoke of compassion, forgiveness, and a kingdom not of this world. Aulus, a product of a different age, struggled to understand his daughter's newfound faith. This new religion, this Christianity, with its talk of turning the other cheek and worshiping a crucified carpenter, seemed alien and subversive. It challenged the very foundations of Roman strength and authority. One cool evening, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and concern, Aulus found himself standing outside the catacombs, the secret meeting place of Rome's growing Christian community. He had heard whispers of what transpired within those dark and winding tunnels. Secret rituals, subversive teachings, and a defiance of Roman law. He hesitated at the entrance, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. It was the scent of hope, mingled with fear, but a hope that refused to be extinguished. He thought of Aelia, her face radiant as she spoke of her faith. What did this Christianity offer that Rome, in all its power and glory, could not? He decided to venture inside, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. The air grew cooler as he descended, the flickering light of oil lamps casting eerie shadows on the rough-hewn walls. He saw the faithful gathered in small groups, their faces illuminated by a shared belief. They sang hymns, their voices echoing through the tunnels, their words speaking of love, sacrifice, and a hope that transcended the trials of this world. Aulus watched, unseen, his heart heavy with a strange mix of emotions. He saw the poor and the outcast finding solace in their shared faith. He saw slaves and senators side by side, united in their belief. He saw in their eyes a strength that had little to do with military might or political power. It was a strength that came from within, a strength that could not be broken by swords or silenced by decrees. Section 6. The walls are breached. The unthinkable happened. The barbarians, emboldened by Roman weakness and disunity, breached the once impenetrable walls of Rome. The eternal city, which had stood for centuries as a symbol of power and civilization, was now at the mercy of invaders. Panic gripped the city. Screams filled the air as the invaders swept through the streets, their torches casting a hellish glow upon the terrified faces of the fleeing populace. The streets, once bustling with life, were now choked with debris, the air thick with the smell of smoke and fear. Aulus, his worst fears realized, found himself caught in the maelstrom. He fought alongside his fellow citizens, his toga discarded, a sword in his hand. But the tide had turned. The legions, once the pride of Rome, were scattered and demoralized, unable to withstand the ferocity of the barbarian onslaught. He saw neighbors hacked down, their pleas for mercy drowned out by the roar of the invaders. He saw the flames engulfing the Forum, the heart of Roman law and governance reduced to ashes. And in the eyes of his enemies, he saw not just bloodlust, but also a strange sense of vindication. A belief that they were the instruments of fate, chosen to bring down a decadent and corrupt empire. Section 7. Amongst the Ruins. The sack of Rome was a nightmare from which Aulus couldn't seem to awaken. The once grand city lay in ruins, its streets littered with the bodies of the dead, its monuments defaced, its spirit seemingly broken. The barbarians, drunk on victory and plunder, roamed the streets at will, their laughter echoing through the shattered remnants of a once great civilization. Aulus, his clothes torn, his body weary, stumbled through the wreckage. He had lost track of his family in the chaos. His heart ached with an emptiness that threatened to consume him. His world, the world he had known and believed in, lay in ashes around him. He reached the smoldering remains of his villa. The beautiful gardens were trampled, the fountains silent, the air thick with the stench of death. He searched frantically, calling out the names of his loved ones, his voice hoarse with grief and exhaustion. But there was no answer, only the echo of his own despair. As he stood there amidst the ruins of his life, a strange calm settled over him. The anger, the fear, the despair all seemed to drain away, leaving behind a strange sense of peace. Rome was gone, but life, he realized, went on. Even in the ashes of destruction, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance for renewal. Section 8. A Father's Hope. Days later, as the initial shock began to subside, Aulus stumbled upon a group of survivors huddled together in the ruins of a basilica. And there, amidst the faces edged with loss and fear, he saw a flicker of recognition. It was Aelia, her clothes ragged, her face grimy, but her eyes shining with an inner light that even the horror she had witnessed could not extinguish. She rushed into his arms, her embrace filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. She had found refuge in the basilica, sheltered by the Christian community. She told him of their acts of courage and compassion, of how they had tended to the wounded, comforted the grieving, and shared their meager rations with those in need. She spoke of a different kind of strength, a strength that came from faith, from compassion, from an unwavering belief in the power of love to overcome even the darkest of times. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of his world, Aulus began to understand. Rome, in all its might, had been built on force, on conquest, on the subjugation of others. Perhaps its time had passed. He learned that Livia and Marcus had taken refuge in the countryside. A wave of relief, so profound it nearly brought him to his knees, washed over him. His family, his blood, survived. There was a reason to hope, a reason to rebuild. Section 9. From the Ashes. The Roman Empire, as Aulus knew it, was no more. The barbarians, having tasted victory, would carve up the remnants of the once mighty empire amongst themselves. Yet, as he stood with Aelia looking out over the ruins of Rome, he felt a strange sense of liberation. The gilded cage had been broken, the old world was gone, destroyed in a maelstrom of fire and blood. But from the ashes, he sensed a new world was being born. It was a world where strength was not measured in legions or gold, but in faith, compassion, and the resilience of the human spirit. He looked at his daughter, her face reflecting the rising sun, and he saw not just the end of an era, but also the beginning of something new, something different. Perhaps this new faith, this Christianity, held the seeds of a different kind of empire. An empire not of conquest and domination, but of love, forgiveness, and redemption. Rome had fallen, but hope, Aulus realized, was a flame that even the darkest of nights could not extinguish. He took his daughter's hand, and together they walked towards the rising sun, towards an uncertain future, carrying with them the faint but persistent embers of a new beginning.